Hello, welcome to another exciting episode of Pete vs. Anxiety. My guest today is a psychologist from Vermont who's working with couples for over 30 years. Through his teachings, consulting, writing, podcasts, and videos about relationship, his ideas have helped thousands of couples and their therapists. Please welcome in the host of the Couples Therapy in 7 Words, the one, the only Bruce. Is it Chalmers?
No S on the end, just
Oh,
Chalmer.
Chalmers. There you go. Got it. Anyways, Bruce, well, thank you so much for being here. Why don't you give everybody a little bit of rundown of your background, man? Because you've been doing this for a while now.
I have indeed. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Peter. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Yeah. I've been, as you mentioned, I've been seeing couples and individuals and couples actually for over 30 years now. And if you, I don't know how many people are seeing this as opposed to hearing it, but just from knowing that, I'm actually in my 70s. So this was not my first career. For a while, I was a statistician. I was teaching courses in data communications. I got my PhD in psychology, but it wasn't originally on the clinical side. It was on the research side. So I'm an old math guy, an old statistician guy. I got into the clinical side through some issues that I was going through in my own life that led me to experience therapy. And I said, wow, this feels like something I want to do. It's powerful. It's funny. I had experiences of therapy when I look back on it, some of which were really good, some of which were frankly really bad, and things in the middle. But I learned from all of it, and I just found this is something I really wanted to do. It felt more, the stuff I was doing before was fun and was okay, and I was good at it, but this feels more like a calling. This is like, wow, this is kind of what I'm here to do. So I'm still doing it, even though I am in my 70s. I'm still really loving doing couples work. I started focusing almost exclusively on couples work for the last 8 or 10 years, I think. I moved more and more toward that. I just found working with couples so compelling. It's people are dealing with really hard stuff and they need help. And, saying nothing against individual therapy, which I've done a lot of as well, but it's not about navel gazing. It's about stuff that's really troubling them and they really need help. And it has big ramifications. So it's an honor for me to participate in that.
So what would you say the number one issue a lot of couples run into, though? Like, you've been doing this for so long. What is like the most common thing that tends to pop up?
Yeah, most common, you talk to an old statistician, I'm thinking, oh, you want the mode. Yes. The most common one is infidelity. That, among couples. I mean, I've seen lots of people come to me with all kinds of issues, but the one I once did a sort of seat of the pants guess, like what proportion of the folks that I meet in the first session. It's not quite half, but it's close to half where there's infidelity. And if not infidelity, there's other kinds of things that people experience as betrayal. So, somebody was caught in some kind of nasty lie of some kind, or some financial stuff, or who knows what, or often substance issues, which often involves lying when somebody is saying, yes, I
Yeah,
stopped,
definitely.
but they really didn't, all that kind of stuff. So that's the biggie, I think.
Yeah, but why is it infidelity though? Why do you feel like most people are, what's their most reasoning for that though? I mean, because a lot of times, it does come up a lot. A lot of people, the way it's viewed in social media now these days is like a lot of people make jokes of like it's funny, but it's not really not. That's somebody's life you're putting on a microscope when you do these things.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, infidelity happens because, well, if you look it up from an anthropological perspective, and I'm not an anthropologist, but I remember reading Helen Fisher. She was an anthropologist, just died, I think, last year. But she wrote a lot about that from an anthropological perspective. Why do we do what we do? One of the things she said is, if you look at human cultures all over the globe, including cultures that were, developing on their own, sort of isolated from other cultures for like thousands of years in some cases. And what you find is we all do variations on the theme of serial monogamy with clandestine adultery. It's part of the deal. Not everybody doesn't cheat. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everybody cheats, but the phenomenon exists in every culture where we have a kind of, most cultures, even the ones that allow polygamy, most cultures, nevertheless, in practice are mostly monogamous. And there's always cheating. There's all kinds of reasons for it. It varies with the individual. Often cheating is about failure in the relationship itself to meet, my shtick is to talk about 2 different sets of needs that we're trying to
Yeah.
fulfill by being
No,
in a
I get you on
relationship.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and if intimacy, and I don't just mean sex, if intimacy isn't sufficiently fulfilled, then that often leads to something like infidelity or some other way of trying to restore intimacy or trying to break out of it if it's not working.
Yeah, I think it's funny when people hear intimacy, they think sex is the first thing. It's really not. A lot of
Yeah,
times it's
it's
just a
not.
simple, just doing something with somebody, just like being there for them, being real close. It's just those little things that matter. Like I learned with my wife, there's certain things that like it just help her better with her mental health. Like I'll come home and I'll try and clean up the house. Like no, I won't get it to her perfection level. I'm getting there. She's teaching. She trains me as she says. What she is, she's teaching me how she wants things done. And I'm stubborn to learn, but I'm learning that, like little things like going to the dishes in the kitchen, like there's a sink, some dishes in the sink. I got to get them out of there because if not, it's going to drive me insane, but that thing matters to her. And I think a lot of people think that you got to do these big grand gender, big old displays. It's really not. It's the little things that matter. Listen to what your partner's saying. Like, I think that the biggest issue, I think, for a lot of people is they don't communicate. Would you agree to that?
Well, I have a shtick about that one too. So,
Yes, I love it.
yeah, I would say it's a substantial majority of couples when they're telling me in the first session, what's going on. They will say, "Well, we need to communicate better. We're not communicating with each other. We try to communicate. We end up in a fight. We end up in a deep freeze. We're trying to communicate." And I like to point out in a slightly snarky way. I try not to be snarky with the couples I'm working with, but I wrote a whole book about this called "It's Not About Communication." That's a pretty snarky statement right there because everybody's saying they need to communicate better. They're not wrong. But what I point out is, no, you're actually communicating very effectively. The problem isn't that you don't know how to communicate. The problem is what you are communicating. If what you're communicating is mistrust and contempt and anger and all kinds of nasty stuff, well, you're communicating that very effectively. And if what you were communicating was love and compassion and patience and all kinds of good stuff, you'd find that would work just fine. The vast majority of people don't need rules for communicating, and the rules are
Yeah.
silly. The
Yeah, no, I
rules
agree.
people learn, and lots of therapists will teach you all kinds of rules. Well, this is how you can have a good, communication. Yeah, you don't need that probably, unless you're on the autistic spectrum, perhaps.
Yeah.
But there are some folks who need to actually learn some rules for understanding, okay, this is how you can tell if your partner's happy with you or pissed at you. Most of us, if you're not on the spectrum, you knew that from the time you were an infant. So if it's not about that, you really don't need communication rules. What you need to do is figure out why are you so pissed off at your partner, or why are you
Exactly.
contemptuous of your partner, or
Or why
whatever
they're
things like
mad
that.
at you, what you're doing that's upsetting
Exactly.
them. How about start by asking them, like, there's a first one for you. Just ask them, say, listen, but don't
Yes.
get mad when they tell you something, though, I think is the other thing too, because I tend to get upset sometimes when my wife says something to me, but it's like she's not wrong though. I think it's what really upsets me is that she's right though. She's like, hey, you're not gonna do this to me like you used to, because like you get so pre-programmed from being in relationships for such a long period of time. From my experience. Now you're the expert on this one, so you could probably tell me I'm wrong on this one, but I spent 15 years with my ex. So like the things I started doing certain things I would do with my ex with my wife now, and she's like, "Yeah, I don't think so. We're not going to do that. We're
Yeah.
going to cut that
Yeah.
off right away." She's one of those like, yeah, we're not doing that. Sorry.
Well, and that is the mark of experience often. When somebody's willing to say what's bothering them, in a way that is not it's not horrible. It's just, wait a minute, this is bothering me. I call that intimacy. The way I define intimacy is when you are able to be present and honest with yourself and each other. And so for your wife to be able to say, "Hey, I don't like what you're doing here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that."
The way she
Yeah.
does it too, some people might take it as she's kind of being rude, but it's the way I need it delivered to me though, because I just need a straight, blunt answer. Like sometimes, and I'll get mad. She'll call it out too. Oh, you're getting mad? Oh, you don't like it? Okay, well then I need you to understand this is what you're doing. And you need to understand that you shouldn't be doing this because this feeling you're having now is you don't like. And she's real good at it too, trust me. I put my foot in my mouth several times, and I've had to deal with it from there. And, when I'm starting to learn little by little, I just kind of like we are having a conversation that she may kill me for sharing this, but we were having a conversation today, okay? So we stopped to get she stopped at the liquor store on the way home and was like, look, waiting for me to respond in a negative way, but there was no reason to. So I'm just like, you're fine. You're not doing anything wrong. I knew she's had a history of, addiction and things like that too. So like, I'll tell her if I feel like it's getting a little out of hand, hey, listen, we need to cool the jets a bit. But she like the way she reacted was so interesting, Bruce. She was like, I'm like, are you okay? She's like, she started freaking out. She's like having like a panic attack. She's like, I'm waiting for you to say, like, she's like, I'm waiting for you to get upset. I'm like, well, I'm not. I'm like, why? Why am I gonna get upset? She's like, what? Just from, you get upset before. I'm like, no, I'm learning that just not worth it. Like, you get upset, start yelling at somebody, it's not gonna get you anywhere. You're gonna get them more excited. They're gonna get more mad, and then the conversation is gonna break down. There's no conversation after that. You're just into a screaming match, and then you start slinging faults at each other. And then what are you at? At the end of the day, you just said something you can't take back to that person.
Yeah, yeah. The general word I use for that phenomenon you just described, and I use this very broadly, is panic.
Yeah.
That's what panic is. And you mentioned that my wife Judy Alexander and I do a podcast. It's called Couples Therapy in 7 Words. Well, what are the 7 words? I don't know how many people are seeing this rather than hearing it, but I have it on a
Well, they'll
cup.
be able to see and hear it. I'm everywhere.
Okay, good. Yes, so you're on YouTube
Be
or
kind,
whatever,
don't
right?
panic, and have
And
faith.
have
I love
faith.
it.
Yes.
I love
And
it.
that there's our podcast logo,
I love
Couple
it.
Therapy in 7 Words. But that's what the 7 words are. And the whole point of that, if you kind of think about it step by step, it's 3 principles, right? Be kind, don't panic, and have faith. Well, the reason it's in that order is, I mean, be kind in the sense of kinship. You experience kinship. Don't panic is so that you can therefore experience kinship. Because if you're in a panic, when people get mad, it's just one form of panic.
Yeah.
When you get mad, you're no longer thinking of that other person as kin. You're in some kind of fight or flight mode, or freeze or something. You're not hearing each other at that point. The whole
No.
sections of brain that have to do with actually being able to hear somebody else and say, you're disagreeing with me, maybe I better think about that. That's not available when you're in a panic. And faith, and I don't mean religious faith necessarily, although it's not the opposite of religious faith, but it's not the same thing. By faith, I just mean a mindset that says this whole living business is somehow good rather than bad. In other words, okay, you're complaining about something, and I don't mean that in a whiny way. I mean, you're saying you're objecting to something. I don't like it because there's something about that that's causing me some anxiety. If I can tolerate that anxiety, there's got to be something to what you're saying, even if I don't agree with all the details. If you're saying it, you're valid, I'm valid. We might disagree, but there's got to be something in here that's meaningful. Let's work with it rather than try to deny it or just yell about it. That's what I mean by faith. The couples that can manifest that kind of faith are the ones who can get through really hard stuff. And you're talking about something that's seen at the liquor store. That's a scary thing when somebody, your partner's had a history of addiction issues, and there you are stopping at a liquor store, and that could freak you out. But if it doesn't freak you out, then you can actually hear each other. And her reaction, you were describing it, was, wow, yeah, she's freaking out, expecting you to freak out. And now when you don't, now she has to figure out, okay, is this a good idea or not? And she'll have to figure that out. And of course, that's true of anybody. Anybody who has any sort of history of addiction knows they're the only, you can't control what they do or don't do.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have to figure that out themselves. The 12-step approach is to recognize, well, you need help with that from a higher power. But however you look at that, as a partner, and Al-Anon would tell you this, as a partner, it does you no good to try and control what they're doing.
Yeah.
You need to have faith that they're,
And that's true too. I mean, you can't control them. I mean, you can, when it comes to addiction, from my experience, from the people I've interviewed on this show, is that either you're in or you're out. And I tell people this too. Someone had asked me of another addiction that somebody else had. A friend of mine's better half, he had a porn addiction. And I was like, listen, I'm going to tell you right now, you better be fully engaged and ready to be engaged in this thing, regardless how rough it's going to get. You need to be there for him. You can't be half in and half out, because it's not going to end well. And he's not going to trust you at that point, because he's going to be like, well, when are you going to leave me again? With her, it was, she's made amazing strides. I'm so happy about her. She's done so great. She was honest about things. So she's had slip ups, and she's done something that was like really to a magnitude of really bad. But, she came and told me about it, and she's like, you're going to be mad. I'm like, why? You came and told me about it. I can't get upset. It's already been done with. The issue already happened. You came to me and were honest with me about it, and at the same time, she educates me on things to look out for. Hey, listen, if I get these certain things, I need you to keep an eye for me, and let me get back in these. You know what I mean? It's the great thing too, is if you listen, they can teach you these things. Like, they're teaching
yes.
you all these things, what to look for and stuff like that too, And I feel like with her, the open communication, it's great until I break it down, because it's usually me that gets frustrated when I try to say something, and I get all flustered, and I'll just, you know what I mean? And it's like, you figure it out, I learn, but I'm having to learn how to communicate better. Because I
Yeah.
get so
Well, there's a
flustered.
gendered piece, there's a gendered piece to that. Women, I'm going to make a gross generalization, but I think it's overall true. Women as a group are way better
Yes.
at naming even how they feel themselves than we as men are. We
Yeah.
kind of suck at that. We don't let ourselves know. We don't have words for it. We don't have practice with words for it. We shy away from talking about it. We just get pissed.
Yeah.
And
But
I'm
why
not saying
why
women
is
are
that though?
nicer
I
than men.
don't.
It's not that, but Go ahead.
You would figure though with nowadays, if we look at like the suicide rates of being 80% being men, it's like
Mhm.
we got to do something. Like, what is the number going to be for us to finally start talking about it? And me and a couple of guys, I know we actually have conversations openly about these kind of things, and it's like we're at 80%. What would you know, 81% for us to start saying something? It's also you have the social media now where these people are influencing these younger kids like to think, oh well, don't you can't talk about your feelings because it's a whole alpha male system. Me and a woman named Betsy Holmberg were talking about this. We were discussing the neuroscience of it, and she was saying just like that you said, women communicate better because they're more of like a community kind of sense. Us males, we want to see who could be the top dog. We got to knock each other off the bars as we go, kind of thing. And to me, it's like if you're going to be the alpha male, you should be able to talk about everything. You should be able to talk about your feelings. All this stuff should be on the table, and it's crazy.
Well, it's a delicate balance, and it's been interesting because being as old as I am, I'm remembering I was born in the 1950s. I remember that very well. I was born in 1951. I'm 74 now, and I remember the 50s, and then I remember the like second wave feminism in the 70s, and how much that has changed the language, and it's left a lot of ways both women, but especially men, confused as hell. It's like, okay, so if we say we're not supposed to have any of those characteristics of an alpha male, that doesn't work. And you know who I hear that? You know who I hear saying that? I hear that from women. I hear women saying, I don't want the guy to be a girlfriend with a penis. I want the guy to be a guy. On the other hand, the problem, and you're describing it, the problem is we end up not knowing how to be at all. We don't know how to impress women anymore. Women as a group, again,
Yes,
speaking in broad
exactly.
terms, women as a group are achieving more than they ever used to. And
Yeah.
it's left a lot of us as men confused about, well, what the hell do they need us for? In a lot of ways, they don't need us the way they used to. And yet they still want us, believe it or not. And a lot of guys have a hard time believing that. But it's like, no, actually, the heterosexual women I talk to are looking for men to be men. They're not looking for men to be idiots. They're looking for men to be men.
Yeah, exactly. I think you make a good
But they're
point
not
there.
looking for men to be women either, And we haven't quite figured out how to do that. And a lot of it I think, has to do with that general panic of not quite knowing how to react to a woman who is saying things like, hey, I don't like what you're doing. We don't know how to receive that with grace. We don't know how to be in leadership roles without being jerks about it, which is a lot of times what women are asking for from us.
Yeah, well,
We
we
all have a
also
lot
got
to
to
learn.
remember social media plays parts in this too now because that's everybody's thing now. If you don't see a kid doing this, then you're not seeing anything normal in today's reality. They're seeing all these guys online saying, oh, we got to do this and that, be this and that. You have to do that, and it's like you're also battling that too because now you have these other outside influences that are telling them, oh, no, you can't do this because this is what they see. And
Yeah.
they're thinking, oh, well, this is what I need to be like. I need to be an asshole to these women because that's what they want. And most of them don't want that. They just want you to be the one that protects them, like a man, protect them, things like that too. Like, you could be honest with your feelings, but it's like, then at the same time, they don't want that either. And it's just confusing. But like,
It is confusing. The other thing about social media, whatever it is you will find social media that will tell you you're wrong about it.
yeah,
Or
exactly.
you'll find social
Yeah.
media that will send you down a rat hole and be extremely that way.
Yeah.
There's, one of the things I'm encouraged by, I don't know, I'm coming from Vermont. I'm not sure what state. Where are you
I'm in
located?
Texas currently.
In Texas, yeah. I don't know if they have this in Texas or not. They do in a lot of states now. Vermont just recently did this where they're basically banning the use of cell phones in school.
Yeah,
It's like,
ours is doing that in the school zones too. Like if you get caught with they're cracking down here for sure. And
yeah,
including
and
school
I
too,
am
they
so
lock them up.
encouraged. Because the kids themselves are saying, I've heard, I've seen interviews with kids themselves. They're saying, it was hard at first, but oh my God, I saw a principal who was interviewed at one of the schools in Vermont who was saying the cafeteria is now about, twice as loud as it used to be.
Yeah.
Because it used to be they were just sitting there on their phones and nobody was talking to each other. Now they're not allowed to use their phones. They're actually talking to each other. It's a lot louder. And so kids are actually having experiences with real live human beings as opposed to these curated things that you see on social media, and it seems to be helping. So I have some hope that maybe that'll start to turn things around.
One thing I do too is like when my wife starts talking to me, if I'm looking at my phone or something, try that, guys. Try putting your screen down. Put your screen down. Don't even look at
Yes.
it. Don't touch it. Actively look at them when they're talking to you. Because if I'm not looking at her, I won't listen, and things like that. So I learned, like, I'm just going to put it downward. I'm going to stop what I'm doing. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter if it's not important or not. I'm going to listen to what she wants to say because I want to make sure she feels heard. That way,
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
good
And
practice.
the very fact that she's saying it makes it important, whatever it is. That, and of course, I think we all want that, men and women both. We all want that sense that we are centrally important to our main partner. Yeah, it's funny. It's unrealistic to think that all your partner ever thinks about is you. That's ridiculous. That better not be the case. But we certainly want to feel that sense of that we're centrally important. You know, one of my favorite metaphors I talk about for a couple is the emotional bank account. We want to have a nice healthy balance in the emotional bank account. Well, what do I mean by that metaphor? When the emotional bank account is full, all I mean is every time you have a positive interaction, every time you've given yourselves a lovely experience with each other, you've made a deposit in there. And when you have a nice, healthy balance, you can afford the occasional withdrawal. What's an occasional withdrawal? Somebody speaks a little sharply, somebody's a little grumpy, somebody's a little off. Maybe you're pissed at each other a little bit, whatever. There's room for that. And when you have that nice, healthy balance, it's like, okay, if your partner speaks sharply to you, you're figuring, oh, wait a minute, let me listen. It's like, you're not usually mad at me. So if you're mad at me in the moment, it's like, geez, maybe I should listen and take account of that. It's like, maybe I ought to do something different, or maybe I'll disagree, but at least I ought to listen. When the account is depleted, the reason I like this metaphor is what happens when you write a check and you have insufficient funds? It's bad enough that you pissed off the person you wrote the check to, right? You just bounced a check, right? They're going to be pissed. It's worse than that because the bank hits you with a great big overdraft fee. And it's the same thing in the emotional bank account. When you haven't got enough in there, when you're just baseline pissed at each other, and then some little annoyance happens, it's not just a little annoyance anymore. It's made way worse by the fact that you're overdrawn. It's like, oh, there's more evidence that there's more evidence that our relationship is down the tubes, and it gets worse. So everything is magnified. And so the challenge for a couple, if you want to do well, is to maintain a nice, healthy balance in that emotional bank account. And that means, as another of my favorite things to recognize, we're just meeting, Pete. But one thing I can say about you that I knew before I ever met you, and about your wife, and about me, even about my wife a little bit, we are human beings, and that means we are annoying as hell. We are all
I'll tell you
annoying.
I am.
We are
Yep.
all annoyed and annoying. And that is the human condition. If you're with somebody for not all that long, they're going to be annoying, and you're going to be annoying. We're all annoying. And the more we are able, that's what I claim is the one skill that solves all relationship problems. Is that a little bit grandiose? Just a tad. The one skill that solves all relationship problems is the ability to be moderately annoyed without freaking out. You're moderately annoyed. It's like, okay, well, it's just the human condition. You can laugh about it. If you haven't got that, and that's again tied into that emotional bank account thing. If you're constantly at each other, there's no room for that normal moderate annoyance. It just snowballs. It gets worse. And those are the couples that often end up, making appointments with me. They're already at that point, and it's really painful. And turning that around it's often possible, not always. It's often possible, and sometimes difficult to do, especially if there've been big betrayals like infidelity.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because for me, I have different views than she does about it, and my thing is like one and done for me. I'm like, I'm done.
Mm.
Anybody that knows anything about astrology, I have an Aries moon, which means I just like once I'm done with you, I cut you off. That's it. There's no question of anything else after that point. When I'm done with you, I'm done with you, kind of thing. And I feel like it's once that betrayal happens because my ex cheated on me, and I think that's what it really goes back to. Is like if anything close to that, I'm just like, yep, I'm done. I'm not gonna put myself through that. I don't think I just to me, I just can't forgive somebody who did that because it's like then your constant thought process is okay. So when are they going to do it again? My anxiety will start taking that and running with it, and things like that too. So, you know, um, so
Yeah, yeah.
so let's talk about your podcast. So when did you guys start doing it though? Was it originally a couples project, or was it just like
Yeah,
you started
we
doing it and then
the
she
whole time
joined
we've
with
done
you?
it. Yeah, well, I'll tell you when we started. It's kind of tied to the publication date of my first book about couples. Actually, I wrote a statistics book in 1986, but I'm not counting that one. But it's still out there, right? You can still buy the damn thing. It's amazing. It's on Amazon. I don't know how the hell they got it there. I mean, the publisher put it there evidently. And that book has bound into the cover, if you get the hardcover, a 5.25-inch floppy disk. That's before your time.
Yep, I remember
But
floppy disks. Yep,
you remember,
there's
yeah,
a
so
short
five and a
period of
quarter
time. I
inch
remember
floppy
them.
disk.
Yep.
Yes, that's like ridiculous. But anyway, no, the first book I wrote about couples thing came out. Here's the date, February 29th, leap day, February 29th of 2020. Well, guess what happened right after February 29th of 2020? Everything shut down. That was the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So we couldn't do any in-person book promotion events. So I was thinking about, well, what should we do? And so I said, well, there's this Facebook Live thing, which I had never tried before. Let's try a Facebook Live thing. And I asked my wife to participate because she's great. in my humble opinion. She's great on the air. She's got a great voice. She has some experience, with that sort of thing. And we have fun. We just have fun. So we did a Facebook Live book promotion event, and lots of people who saw it, they said, "Oh, wow, you guys should do a podcast." And then right around the same time, I was interviewed on someone else's podcast about my then new book. And she said, "Oh, wow, you'd be great. You guys should do a podcast." And she happened to know both of us. So the podcast was born. So we started it in whatever, I forgot which month in 2020 it was, but it's been over 5 years now. We're recording this in October of 2025. So it's been over 5 years, about 5.5 years. And I think we're at episode number 226, something like that. We've been doing a lot. We just have a blast. Roughly half of those, I think, maybe a little over half of those episodes, we have a guest, as
Yeah.
indeed you do. And just we've learned so much from all sorts of different people we've interviewed literally all over the world, as far away as Australia and
Hmm.
lots of people in Europe and, all over the place. Don't think we've had anybody in South America. We've had some people in the Caribbean. Anyway, I'd have to think about that. But anyway, all over the place. And we learn a lot from them. So we just have a lot of fun doing it. And it's also a place where we'll bounce around the ideas that I'm writing about in whatever book I'm writing. So this is my fourth book that's about to come out in a few weeks, actually. It's due to come out.
Nice.
This last book I've written is called The Passion Paradox: When You Feel Miles Apart and Still Love Each Other. And that's who it's aimed at. That's I think a pretty substantial majority of the couples who consult me. They're consulting me because they still love each other. They're consulting me because they want to find a way maybe of staying together, but they feel miles apart. Something has gone wrong. And something is worrying them about that. And, that it varies with a couple, but that's what this latest book, it's actually a workbook I wrote to guide people to ask themselves the questions they need to ask and learn the skills they need to learn so they can actually make an action plan and figure out, oh, what am I going to do about this? And so that's the most recent book that is about to come out in a few weeks.
That's pretty cool, though. So, in my first year of this show, I've only been doing this about a year now, year and a half now, year and a couple months actually. I did 200 episodes in the first season.
Whoa! I'm impressed.
Because I was a busy man, and this season's a little different. I toned it back a little bit. I got a little overzealous the first time, but every time I hit record, it was the same thing like you did. You invited guests to come on, and you just start talking to people, and they start teaching you things, and I always try to take away something from the conversation, and I like the emotional bank. The analogy, I think it's really great because it makes a lot of sense. You think about it, like, someone says something, they're gonna give you that look, and things like I love it. I think it's great. I'm actually gonna borrow that too because I'm gonna tell my wife about it. But I think it's really great. I think it's a really good idea. But like I did 200 of them. I've talked to everybody. Like I was just like so enthralled because I love doing it. It's so great. It's just therapeutic because I get to talk to new people. I learn new things. I get to share a little bit of my story. Get to hear other people's story. But like when I started this thing, dude, there was a demand. Like I put a post out. Okay, hey, they're doing an idea. 150 responses instantly. I was like, oh God, I was overwhelmed. So I'm like, I'm trying to do this all myself. And then I realized there's digital calendars. All these other fun things that come up as you go. But it's been interesting though since I first day I hit record on this thing. I've talked to Columbine shooting survivors. I've had people talk about their suicide ideation on here. I think relationship is really the one we don't get a lot. So when I got a chance to get you, I was like, yeah, let's get them on here because this is really great. Me and my wife, I learned a lot of things from her, and it's great. And we were talking about doing a podcast idea, like where we invite couples on and we discuss the different issues couples have and we all debate about it. Like we invite a couple couples on and then we all talk about a certain topic and then we all share each other's opinions and see how different everybody's opinions are towards, certain things. Just kind of like start conversation amongst people just to see what people's thoughts are, So I love the idea that the two of you all this is a project together for you guys because it's so interesting to see because sometimes like I had co-hosts before, it never worked out well for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know what
you
I
know
mean?
what? One of the reasons, and Judy has commented on this quite a bit, one of the reasons ours works as well as it does is that we're not struggling for anything here.
Yeah.
There's not, mostly because she says, we'll often say it this way: I'm the therapist and she's the real person, So we have our relative roles. She has written a book actually, which we plug on the podcast, but it's actually a book of erotica. She's written a book of biblical erotica, if you can believe that. It's a beautiful book, but she's not a couples therapist herself. So
Yeah.
she's coming from a layperson perspective. And, I'm the so-called expert on the therapy type stuff because that's what I do. So we have those respective roles and it flows easily from that.
Yeah,
And
I
we
could see
also
that.
really enjoy, the other thing people will tell us about our podcast, and it's kind of part of the subtext of the podcast itself. We've got great chemistry between us. And people see that. We genuinely enjoy each other's company. We laugh a lot in doing our podcasts. And that's kind of part of the underlying message. It's like, yeah, and we've talked about our own stories as well quite a bit. We're in a second marriage. We've been married now for 21 years, and she's a few years younger than me. She's in her late 60s, and I'm in my early or mid 70s now, I would have to say. So I'm 6 years older. But that phenomenon of our having both been in marriages that ended up not working out for different reasons, saying nothing bad about our exes, but we both learned a lot by being in that. And I think that metaphor about the emotional bank account is a lot of that has to do with recognize we are so grateful for each other. We're so grateful to be in a marriage that it is joyous, that whatever annoyances exist are, again, they're funny, they're trivial. They're just not, it's not a big deal. And I don't think that would have been as true if I hadn't learned what I learned by going through a marriage that didn't work out. I don't think I would have been a therapist actually if I hadn't been through those earlier marital struggles from which I suffered a lot, but also learned a lot.
Yeah.
And the short story, I usually tell it this way: the short story of my first marriage is that both my ex and I have gone on to marry really wonderful women, and we're both a lot happier. That's basically the short story of my first marriage. So I like my ex's wife, and she likes my wife, and we both have wives, and that sort of tells you why our marriage didn't work out. And that I learned so much from going through that. And my now wife, her first marriage ended for very different reasons, but we both learned a great deal through those struggles, and I think that plays out in our podcast as well. Certainly plays out in the books I've written as well.
Yeah, no, I could tell. It's great. I love it. Like I could already feel it. I haven't even met her, and I can already feel the chemistry's there, man. And I think it's great that she's giving it from her perspective, and you have yours. You have the technical side, and she's just giving just a straightforward answer what she sees, And I think that's what works so better, the counterbalance of things like that too. Because my wife's taught me a lot about mental health stuff. She was like, if you're going to be in this space, you better be authentic because people read through crap easily. And I'm like, okay, well, she's got a point. She kept hammering it home. Listen, you better be authentic about these things. Don't do this. And she's my harshest critic, but at the same time, she's not wrong when she's telling me these things. She's telling me, oh yeah, you need to, and then her friends start asking about it. And then these people that we play online games with too, a lot of them are listening to the show too. Now it's funny because a lot of people come to me and go, oh, listen to your show. I like what you're doing. There's a random guy, in fact, that came up to me where I work, and he's like, hey, listen, I listen to your podcast. He's like, I love it. I've been listening to it all the time. It's like, really? It's like, it's so surreal when people tell you they're listening to your show. Like you get random people coming to you saying things, and then it's like, people approach me differently. They're like, listen, I know you can handle this conversation. Then they go into some kind of subject about, their mental health issues they're having, or somebody else has something similar to some problems, But it's great because I can pull back from those guest lists I had of people. I could reach out and ask them, hey, listen, I got a question for you, and I have a couple therapists that are here in Texas. Hey, listen, I had a question for you. You're in Texas, you practice Texas, you know anybody that fits in this category that could help? Could you help, or could someone help? And I've done that a couple times now where I've used it, some of my contacts. So it's been nice, but you don't realize a lot of people just need a space to talk about these things,
Yeah,
and that's what I'm providing for them. And it's just like, after the first year of the show, I did a birthday video for the show just 1 year, and all these videos just started flying in. Like I had like 12, 13 videos that were people just, I've been on the show, and you don't realize how much effect you have on people. And then I'm finding out people like, I have a friend of mine, she has a podcast as well about addiction. She was like, I hear your name come up an awful lot. I'm like, I'm sorry to hear that lately. Thanks. I know, because like everybody knows Pete versus anxiety. And like, there's all these different people. And then when I remember the first time somebody mentioned my name, it was funny because it was a few months after I met this person, and she goes, it was, oh, do you know Pete versus anxiety? And the other person's like, yeah, I know him. Da-da. It's like, it's so funny to listen to yourself being talked about in a podcast. If people are having a conversation about you, and you're like, whoa, damn, I had that much influence on somebody that they're talking about me. And, and every imposter syndrome was a big thing for me at first, but now it's like, it's gotten easier. Yeah. So, I mean, I love what I do. I think it's great. I get up, there's some days where I'm having my depression kind of kicks my butt a little bit, but I get on. This is the happy spot because I get to meet new people. I get to talk to them about different things and engage in conversations with people. So with that being said, Bruce, do you have any advice for people maybe out there struggling with some things? Like, hey, listen, here's some things to get you guys started.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really relates to that concept of intimacy, believe it or not. And again, not, as we said earlier, I don't just mean sex there at all.
Yeah.
What you just described about coming to your happy space of doing this podcast, it's because you're having intimate conversations. What your wife was telling you, it's like, yeah, you got to be genuine. You got to show up and actually be the person you are. That's what it's about. That's what it's about in therapy too, by the way. And that applies not only to the person using the therapist, but the therapist. We as therapists need to show up as real people. That's one of the things I've written a lot about is if we start getting ideological as opposed to having ideas. Everybody's got lots of ideas. A lot of them are good. I've got all kinds of ideas I think are good. There's all kinds of other people who have ideas that are quite different from mine, and they're good too, even if they're opposite of mine. The problem isn't ideas. There's all kinds of ideas. When you have an intimate conversation, you're generating new ideas. You're thinking stuff that neither of the people in the conversation would have thought by themselves. You've sort of formed a joint mind. That feels alive. That's kind of the antidote to depression. It feels like, oh, wow, I'm engaged with another human being. That feels really good. The problem you bump into, and this happens in the therapy space, and it happens in the religious space, and it happens in the political space, God knows. The problem you bump into is when people get ideological. And by ideological, I simply mean whatever your good ideas are, hardening them into ideology, which means it's no longer about actually exchanging ideas. Now it's about defending your side. It's become tribal. Oh my God, you just said that. That means you're one of them, whichever side you're
Yeah, I've
on
had
or
somebody
something.
like that. I didn't.
Yeah,
I
and
did,
it's like now I can't listen to you. I can't respect anything you say. As opposed to, isn't that interesting? All kinds of people have all kinds of different experiences that lead them to different ideas. Some of which are. I'm not saying you shouldn't argue. I'm not saying you shouldn't have your ideas that you think are really important. Of course you should. We all do. I'm just saying when it's ideas, it's generative. It feels alive. Therapy like that actually helps you. Therapy, when you go to a therapist and they're going to tell you, this is your problem, I know exactly what to do. One of my pet peeves, you see this all over the internet. Like somebody will say, oh, you're dealing with a narcissist. I'm not saying that's an empty concept. It's not an empty concept. I understand the concept, but those videos you'll find zillions of, they seem to pop up often anything to do with mental health. I'll bet, in the same feed as yours or
yeah,
mine, you're going to find out, here's how to handle a narcissist. And I cringe when I see that because it's not that it's an empty concept. It's that they're so sure of themselves. You can just classify someone that tells you everything about them. You've basically just emotionally killed them.
yeah,
You've basically
yeah.
said, okay, I know what you are and it doesn't matter anything else. And that's not true of anybody. The technical term for that is bullshit. That's basically what that's about.
Well, it's
And
also overused too. Think about a narcissist. Everything does is considered, oh, that's a narcissist. They
oh my
label
God,
everything as
yes.
the same thing. It's like it's not. Do you even know what that word even means? You know what one
Yeah.
would be? Like it
Even in
just
a
drives me
technical
nuts.
sense,
Hmm.
I understand. I've read the DSM. I know what the technical categories talk about. I don't use it a whole lot because I try not to diagnose in the work that I do. I don't rarely need to anymore, especially working mostly with couples. The diagnoses aren't for couples. The diagnoses are for individuals. So I don't generally bandy about those terms. Again, it's not that they're useless. It's that they can be used in a way that closes things down instead of opening things up. So that that phenomenon that you could say, oh wow, you're a narcissist or you're borderline or something like that. It's I've seen those be useful for someone. Borderline's an interesting one because you get that diagnosis, it does hook you into things like dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, which is useful for a lot of folks. It's very respectful, actually. But the other problem with that diagnosis is it's often used as a curse. Say, oh, you're borderline, which means nobody can work with you. In the therapy world, borderline is a diagnosis you get if you pissed off your therapist. It's
You mentioned.
unfair.
I think that's what my first real big interaction was actually a girl I worked with. She told me she had BPD, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more," because I was curious, and it was interesting for her to explain it to me. And I've had a guest on the show that's had it too, and her perspective was different, but it was just like it's just kind of like bipolar. Everybody kind of say, "Oh, the bipolar is the same thing." It's like they run similarities. Now that they do get misdiagnosed either way, but a lot of times that's just a quick word they all want to say. Oh, well, you're bipolar. You're just bipolar. That's all it is. And it's like people start saying these things like it's a joke, and it's not. Like people that
Well,
deal
and
with these things, man, it gets crazier when you get to a certain level of it. It changes
yeah,
the diagnosis when you get to the next
of
levels of
course.
those.
Bipolar in particular, that one, and I'm not talking so much about bipolar 2, which is a more recent
Yeah,
phenomenon.
yeah,
I mean, classical bipolar, what they now call bipolar 1. As a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, right? I haven't been to med school. We need to learn to recognize the possibility of that because that's a medical issue. Bipolar is not the same thing as something like borderline personality disorder, things like that.
hmm,
Bipolar, it's like, wow, there's something going on in your brain that is causing you to go crazy at certain times.
yeah,
And I'm using that term loosely, of course.
yeah, of
But
course,
when somebody's having a manic episode, they can act really nuts.
yeah,
Or similarly, schizophrenia. Often, schizophrenia is That is a brain issue. That's a brain disorder that sometimes means somebody's view of reality is so much different from everybody else's, it becomes difficult for them to interact. That's saying, oh my God, you need to reconsider your attitudes. That's about, oh my God, there's something going on chemically in your brain. And, you know, chemical and non-chemical are all tied up together anyway. It's not like it's all one or the other. But it's not that those things aren't good. But the trouble is when they totalize someone with it. When it's like, that's why I say I've met folks who've said, yeah, I got a diagnosis of borderline, it really helped me. It's like, yeah, it got me in touch with these particular ways of being treated that actually help. Well, that's good. But then there's the problem when somebody gets dismissed because I won't listen to anything you say because you're just borderline. Well, that's nonsense. That nobody is only their diagnosis.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, that's called being human, And look, when I talk about faith, that's what I mean by faith. It's like, no, we are all valid to be who we are. Even when we screw up royally, we are valid. I'm not saying, I'm not saying to ignore morality. No, not at all.
No.
Like there's right and there's wrong and we shouldn't do wrong. But we all fuck up on occasion. I hope I'm allowed to say that in your...
Go ahead. No, free space here to say whatever. I think the more authentic and real we are about this conversation, I think it's just people need to understand is that it gets thrown on a lot, and then people take their diagnosis to run with it too. Like you said, it's like it's what you deal with. It's not what you are, because that's what people start identifying. That's why I don't like diagnosis for that reason. Like I like the idea of like I tell them when I in fact, there's a girl I work with. I told her, I said, listen, if you're going to go to therapy, I said, just see what it is that you may be dealing with, that way you know how to better approach your situation. Don't let your diagnosis be your thing, because it's not you. It's just something you deal with. You're not stuck with it. You can get around some of these. Some of these you can't, but you can manage it with the right, right approach to things, and stuff like that too. So I love that when you said that, because that to me, that's the thing too. Is like you see so many people like, well, I'm depressed, and then all these videos where they have all this great advice, but it's like, where are you getting this information from? Or the guy that was
their identity. They lead with it as their identity. It's like, well, I'm depressed, or here's my list of things that I am. No, here's the list of things you dealt with, and again, maybe recognizing the patterns is useful to tie you into something. The distinction I always like to make, we just had one of the most recent podcasts we just dropped the other day. We were actually talking about my forthcoming book. And I mentioned, I always like to trot out, when I was 49 years old, which is now, 25 years ago, amazingly. That's how old I am. I had a gallbladder problem, right? It took a better part of a year to get the diagnosis. I kept having these attacks. They kept thinking I'm having a heart attack. They kept checking my heart and saying, no, there's nothing wrong with your heart. I don't know what's going on with you. Finally, somebody, I think it was a physician assistant actually, asked the right questions and figured out, wait a minute, let's do an ultrasound. Look at all those gallstones in there. And they had the diagnosis. It wasn't about, they had the diagnosis. They totalized me. They said, your problem is we need to get that gallbladder out of there. They took it out, and by golly, I haven't had an attack since. It's like, haven't heard from it since. That's an example of, okay, diagnoses are incredibly important and useful and definite. But when you're in the behavioral domain, it's rarely like that. That's why I say, yeah, maybe schizophrenia, maybe bipolar, not borderline, not the personality disorders. That's not that simple. It's not like you have, a particular genetic, sequence that says exactly what you have. That's rarely what it is. It's way more complex than that. And it's not the total story. It could be useful, but don't let it be the total story. And that's,
yeah.
As opposed to the
DIDs an interesting one too. When you talk about personality disorders, though, that was interesting. When I came across that originally, I had somebody on the show that said they had it, and it was different from a lot of the things that I did in the actual interview. Like last week with somebody who actually did research with 100 people that actually have and asked them, so the different perspectives of it were really interesting to see how people, the way it affects people differently, Now I've heard other conversations with another woman who interviewed a young lady that had to diagnose her mom on her own and record all the 27 different personalities her mom is portraying and the different handwriting samples just to get her mom some help. She had to go through all these things. And it was interesting to hear because, like people throw it out, but people that's a hard one to diagnose as well too, is just DID for some people, because it's like there's so many different variables that go in it. And then F and D was probably the most interesting one I've seen. where like some people have like paralysis of like certain body parts sometimes the facial one. The woman I talked to had her hand that turns into like, she said it goes like this when she gets really stressed out. And it was an interesting case because she's in the UK and she said that over there, it takes them like 15 to 20 years to figure it out. Like right around there, she said, but she'd always had something weird going. She couldn't figure out, but she had like partial paralysis sometimes. And then she met another person and it was different for them, and that's the interesting thing when I have people. It's interesting to get their different perspectives of what they're dealing with because there's so many different variables that start showing up for things.
There are, and yeah, I actually have some experience working with folks with DID earlier in my career, and it's a fascinating phenomenon.
It is.
And again, it is often useful if you don't let it be a straitjacket, which is true of any diagnosis. But it is often useful because it explains a lot of stuff that other stuff doesn't explain. So it's an approach you can then explore. There's, there's a zillion different ways of thinking about how we all behave and how we all interact. And, and there, again, I've got how many different schools have schools of thought have I been trained in? I actually, for that first book, for the one that came out 2020, I think I listed 15 or I forgot how many it was
Yeah.
that I've had various trainings in, all of which have been useful, none of which are the entire story. Because there is no entire story. One description of somebody captures all of their life. It's just useful to the extent it's useful. Again, if you're careful not to turn it into a straitjacket. It's that
Yes, I
ideas
agree.
versus ideology thing. If you don't harden
No.
into ideologies, ideas can be very useful.
Yeah. No, you're right. I love that too. I think that's a really great point too. It is just like that. So, Bruce, we're at the fun part of the show. I don't know if you've ever watched any of my episodes. I ask 2 questions to everybody that comes on the show. So the first one is actually a really interesting one. And it's funny because I got this from another person who runs a podcast called The Shit That Goes On in Her Head. She asked me in our interview, she said to me, and I'm going to ask you, Bruce, if your mental health had a song, what would that song be?
If I say it again, what was the song?
If your mental health had a
Ah,
song, what would it be?
what a good question.
You know what I mean?
Wow.
This is a real fun one to see how people respond.
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, I'm coming out of my generation's era, so naturally I go right to Beatles songs.
Okay. Beatles are
If I'm
good.
going to
I
be thinking
listen.
in terms of a
I'm a
song,
music lover here, so you're not missing anything with me. Beatles were great.
actually, you know what? But I just realized, no, there's another one. I actually mentioned this in the book. Part of my mental health would be "Call Me Irresponsible."
Okay.
Do you know that song? Call me
Yep.
irresponsible. And it's not because I think I'm actually all that irresponsible. I'm really not. I tend to be fairly boring in that sense, but there's something playful about that. And I like to think that in terms of like, yeah, of course I'm irresponsible. I'm occasionally annoying. Call me annoying, but there's no song, Call Me Annoying. But there is a song, Call Me Irresponsible. So that's one.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, see, I like it because you get different responses. Everybody else responds the same way. They're like, man, that's a great question. We've had
Yeah,
interesting answers on here. So
it's a
someone
fun
asked me
one.
and I broke mine down to like 5 songs. I was like, let me get a little complex on this one for you. Let's see what data feels like, but it's always just a playful one. So my next question, and the reason I started this whole podcast is if you could break the stigma about mental health, I'm talking about like something you see on a daily basis that you just want to like rip your hair out and go, can you just please stop listening to people that say these things or this statement here? What would that be?
Well, I kind of alluded to that. The one that pops in my mind immediately, I kind of alluded to that already. The people who will tell you this is exactly what it is. You're a narcissist or you're
Hmm.
borderline or you're fill in the blanks with anything. Yeah, no, don't let people totalize you because you're valid to be who you are. Even again, when I say I'm valid to be who I am, it doesn't mean that I can't learn. Of course, on the contrary, I should learn. I should fix problems when I screw up, because I'm gonna, but don't let anybody totalize you or just put you in a box and say that's who you are.
I love it. Thank you so much, Bruce. I appreciate you being here today, man. This is great. I enjoyed this conversation for sure. Can you do me a favor? Go ahead and plug where everybody can find you. Say they want to come check out some of your works. The new book's coming out. We obviously know that's going to be on Amazon. If you want to highlight a couple of your other titles so they can come check out as well, we'll plug those as well for you too.
Oh, delighted. Yes. So the actually, I have some props handy here. I
Awesome.
don't have the new book to show you yet, but here's the other ones. Reigniting the Spark was the one that came out in 2020. And then this is the one I mentioned. It's not about communication. That came out in 2022, I believe. And then last year, this one came out, Betrayal and Forgiveness, How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again. So those are all, if you want to get general information about all my stuff, and I'm still in practice too, and I can do coaching for folks. So go to brucechalmer.com. If you spell my name right, that'll get you there. Bruce Chalmer. I'll make it all one word. No S on the end. I won't bother telling you the story of how come we don't have an S on the end, but we don't. brucechalmer.com. And if you go there, you'll find all sorts of information about me. And also you can get a link to our podcast, Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Definitely. I will definitely put a link down below to get to the podcast, to Bruce's website, all that stuff for you. And Bruce, thank you so much for being here again, man. I appreciate it. I had a great time talking to you. I appreciate you coming. Like I said, I love the topic that you're in. I thought it was nice to get something new and a refreshing perspective on things. So, I mean, I'm definitely going to check out the podcast. I'm interested. I kind of want to hear a little bit of it myself. I think it'd be great. You can never be too old to learn anything new, honestly, man. And I think that's what people need to take away from our conversation is that you should always be willing to listen to the other side of the coin.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a lot, Pete. I really enjoyed it.
Not a problem. As with that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap up this episode of Pete vs. Anxiety. You can find me on Pete vs. Anxiety on X all the way down to TikTok. I'm on Spotify all the way down to Pandora Radio. And as I always say, it costs nothing, absolutely nothing to be kind to somebody. One kind act you could do could save someone's life, or hell, you can make their day. I'm Pete vs. Anxiety saying off saying, don't ask how your day is today. Say, hey, how's your mental health today?